All right. So I've done, what was that, 5 Bibles in a row? Let's go ahead and do a textbook reading. So textbook, nope, before that, I'm just going to do readings today. Maybe I'll do OpenStax. I'll do a chemistry. Yeah, I'll do the first chemistry one today. So Sociology Chapter 3 looks like is what I need to do. So let's go ahead and OpenStax. Put that there. Subjects. Social sciences. Sociology. There. PDF. File. Okay. And then bump there. There. Chapter 3. And then we'll zoom into 175. All right. OpenStax Sociology, Chapter 3, Culture. Chapter outline. What is culture? Elements of culture. High, low, pop, sub, counterculture, and cultural change. Theoretical perspectives on culture. Introduction. If you passed someone in a hallway, joined a video conference, or even called into a radio show, it's likely you and the other people involved would exchange some version of the following question. How are you? One of you may ask the other. You may exchange a greeting and the question or one of its variants. Generally, we do not consider our responses to these acquaintances as rules. We simply say hello and ask, how was your weekend? Or some other trivial question meant to be a friendly greeting. We all adhere to various rules, expectations, and standards that are created and maintained in our specific culture. These rules and expectations have meaning, and there are many ways by which the meaning can be misinterpreted or misunderstood. When we do not meet those expectations, we may receive some form of disapproval, such as a look or comment informing us that we did something unacceptable. Consider what would happen if you stopped and informed everyone who asked, "Hi, how are you?" I did not read that right. Hi, how are you? Exactly how you were doing that day in detail. In U.S. society, you would violate norms of greeting. Perhaps if you were in a different situation, such as having coffee with a good friend, that question might warrant a detailed response. These examples are all aspects of culture, which is comprised of shared values or ideals, beliefs which strengthen the values, norms and rules that maintain the values, language so that the values can be taught, symbols that form the language people must learn, arts and artifacts, and the people's collective identities and memories. Sociologically, we examine in which situation and context a certain behavior is expected and in which it is not. People who interact within a shared culture create and enforce these expectations. Sociologists examine these circumstances and search for patterns. In everyday conversation, people in the U.S. rarely distinguish between the terms culture and society, but the terms have different meanings, and the distinction is important to a sociologist. A culture represents the values, beliefs, norms, language, symbols, and practices of a group, while society represents the people who share a culture. Neither society or culture could exist without the other. Within the U.S., many groups of people share a community and a culture. By community, sociologists refer to a definable region of a society, real terra firma, as small as a neighborhood, Brooklyn, or the east side of town, as large as a country, Ethiopia, Nepal, or the U.S., or somewhere in between. In the U.S., this might include someone who identifies as Southern or Midwestern society, with Southern or Midwestern society. In this chapter, we examine the relationship between culture and society in greater detail and pay special attention to the elements and forces that shape culture, including diversity and social changes. A final discussion examines the theoretical perspectives from which sociologists research culture. 3.1. What is culture? By the end of this section, you should be able to differentiate between culture and society, explain material versus non material culture, discuss the concept of cultural universals as it relates to society, compare and contrast ethnocentrism and xenocentrism. Humans are social creatures. According to Smithsonian Institution research, humans have been forming groups for almost 3 million years in order to survive. Living together, people formed common habits and behaviors, from specific methods of child rearing to preferred techniques for obtaining food. Almost every human behavior, from shopping to marriage, is learned. In the US, marriage is generally seen as an individual choice made by two adults based on mutual feelings of love. In other nations and in other times, marriages have been arranged through an intricate process of interviews and negotiations between entire families. In Papua New Guinea, almost 30% of women marry before the age of 18, and 8% of men have more than one wife, according to the National Statistical Office in 2019. To people who are not from such a culture, arranged marriages may seem to have risks of incompatibility or the absence of romantic love. But many people from cultures where marriages are arranged, which include a number of highly populated and modern countries, often prefer the approach because it reduces stress and increases stability, according to Jankowiak, 2021. Being familiar with unwritten rules helps people feel secure and at ease. Knowing to look left instead of right for oncoming traffic while crossing the street can help avoid serious injury and even death. Knowing unwritten rules is also fundamental in understanding humor in different cultures. Humor is common to all societies, but what makes something funny is not. Americans may laugh at a scene in which an actor falls. In other cultures, falling is never funny. Most people want to live their daily lives confident that their behaviors will not be challenged or disrupted. But even an action as seemingly simple as commuting to work evidences a great detail of cultural propriety. That is, there are a lot of expected behaviors and many interpretations of them. Man. Take the case of going to work on public transportation. Whether people are commuting in Egypt, Ireland, India, Japan, and the US, many behaviors will be the same and may reveal patterns. Others will be different. In many societies that enjoy public transportation, a passenger will find a marked bus stop or station, wait for the bus or train, pay an agent before or after boarding, and quietly take a seat if one is available. But when boarding a bus in Cairo, Egypt, passengers might board while the bus is moving, because buses often do not come to a full stop to take on patrons. In Dublin, Ireland, bus riders would be expected to extend an arm to indicate that they want the bus to stop for them. And when boarding a commuter train in Mumbai, India, hold on. Okay. Mumbai, India, passengers must squeeze into overstuffed cars amid a lot of pushing and shoving on the crowded platforms. That kind of behavior might be considered rude in other societies, but in Mumbai, it reflects the daily challenges of getting around on a train system that is taxed to capacity. Culture can be material or non-material. Metro passes and bus tokens are part of material culture, as are the buses, subway cars, and the physical structures of the bus stop. Think of material culture as items you can touch. They are tangible. Non-material culture, in contrast, consists of ideas, attitudes, and beliefs of a society. These are things you cannot touch. They are intangible. You may believe that a line should be formed to enter the subway car or that other passengers should not stand so close to you. Those beliefs are tangible because they do not, or sorry, intangible because they do not have physical properties and can be touched. Material and non-material aspects of culture are linked, and physical objects often symbolize cultural ideas. A metro pass is a material object, but it represents a form of non-material culture, namely capitalism and the acceptance of paying for transportation. Clothing, hairstyles, and jewelry are part of material culture, but the appropriateness of wearing certain clothing for specific events reflects non-material culture. A school building belongs to material culture symbolizing education, but the teaching methods and educational standards are part of education's non-material culture. As people travel from different regions to entirely different parts of the world, certain material and non-material aspects of culture become dramatically unfamiliar. What happens when we encounter different cultures? As we interact with cultures other than our own, we become more aware of the differences and commonalities between others and our own. If we keep our sociological imagination awake, we can begin to understand and accept the differences. Body language and hand gestures may vary around the world, but some body language seems to be shared across cultures. When someone arrives home later than permitted, a parent or guardian meeting them at the door with crossed arms and a frown on their face means the same in Russia as it does in the US, as it does Ghana. Cultural universals. Although cultures vary, they also share common elements. Cultural universals are patterns or traits that are globally common to all societies. One example of a cultural universal is the family unit. Every human society recognizes a family structure that regulates sexual reproduction and the care of children. Even so, how the family unit is defined and how it functions vary. In many Asian cultures, for example, family members from all generations commonly live together in one household. In these cultures, young adults continue to live in the extended household family structure until they marry and join their spouse's household, or they may remain and raise their nuclear family within the extended family homestead. In the U.S., by contrast, individuals are expected to leave home and live independently for a period before forming a family unit that consists of parents and their offspring. Other cultural universals include customs like funeral rites, weddings, and celebrations of births. However, each culture may view and conduct the ceremonies quite differently. Anthropologist George Murdoch first investigated the existence of cultural universals while studying systems of kinship around the world. Murdoch found that cultural universals often revolve around basic human survival, such as finding food, clothing, and shelter, or around shared human experiences, such as birth and death or illness and healing. Through his research, Murdoch identified other universals including language, the concept of personal names, and interestingly, jokes. Humor seems to be a universal way to release tensions and create a sense of unity among people, according to Murdoch, 1949. Sociologists consider humor necessary to human interaction because it helps individuals navigate otherwise tense situations. All right, and then we're going to branch off. This is the sociological research portion of or section. So this is like a separate thing. I'll have to find a way to. So, is music a cultural universal? Imagine that you are sitting in a theater watching a film. The movie opens with the protagonist sitting on a park bench with a grim expression on their face. The music starts to come in. The first slow and mournful notes play in a minor key. As the melody continues, the heroine turns her head and sees a man walking toward her. The music gets louder and the sounds don't seem to go together, as if the orchestra is intentionally playing the wrong notes. You tense up as you watch, almost hoping to stop. The character is clearly in danger. Now imagine that you are watching the same movie, the same exact footage, but with a different soundtrack. As the scene opens, the music is soft and soothing with a hint of sadness. You see the protagonist sitting on the park bench with a grim expression. Suddenly, the music swells. The woman looks up and sees a man walking toward her. The notes are high and bright, and the pace is bouncy. You feel your heart rise in your chest. This is a happy moment. Music has the ability to evoke emotional responses. In television shows, movies, commercials, and even the background music in a store, music has a message and seems to easily draw a response from those who hear it. Joy, sadness, fear, victory. Are these types of musical cues cultural universals? In 2009, a team of psychologists led by Thomas Fritz of the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig, Germany, studied people's reactions to music that they'd never heard. Fritz et al., 2009. The research team traveled to Cameroon, Africa, and asked Mafa tribal members to listen to Western music. The tribe, isolated from Western culture, had never been exposed to Western culture and had no context or experience with which to recognize its or interpret its music. Even so, as the tribal members listened to the Western piano piece, they were able to recognize three basic emotions: happiness, sadness, and fear. Music, the study suggested, is a sort of universal language. Researchers also found that music can foster a sense of wholeness within a group. In fact, scientists who study the evolution of language have concluded that originally language, an established component of group identity, and music were one. Darwin, 1871. Additionally, since music is largely nonverbal, the sounds of music can cross societal boundaries more easily than words. Music allows people to make connections, where language might be a more difficult barricade. As Fritz and his team found, music and the emotions it conveys are cultural universals. Ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Although human societies have much in common, cultural differences are far more prevalent than cultural universals. For example, while all cultures have language, analysis of conversational etiquette reveals tremendous differences. In some Middle Eastern cultures, it is common to stand close to others in conversation. Americans keep more distance and maintain a large personal space. Additionally, behaviors as simple as eating and drinking vary greatly from culture to culture. Some cultures are tools to put food in the mouth, while others use their fingers. If your professor comes into an early morning class holding a mug of liquid, what do you assume they are drinking? In the US, it's most likely filled with coffee, not Earl Grey tea, a favorite in England, or yak buttered tea, a staple in Tibet. Some travelers pride themselves on their willingness to try unfamiliar foods, like the late celebrated food writer Anthony Bourdain. Often, however, people express disgust at another culture's cuisine. They might think that it's gross to eat raw meat from a donkey or parts of a rodent, while they don't question their own habit of eating cows or pigs. Such attitudes are examples of ethnocentrism, which means to violate and judge or evaluate and judge another culture based on one's own cultural norms. Ethnocentrism is believing your group is the correct measuring standard, and if other cultures do not measure up to it, they are wrong. As sociologist William Graham Sumner described the term, it is a belief or attitude that one's own culture is better than all others. Almost everyone is a little bit ethnocentric. A high level of appreciation for one's own culture can be healthy. A shared sense of community pride, for example, connects people in a society. But ethnocentrism can lead to disdain or dislike of other cultures and could cause misunderstanding, stereotyping, and conflict. Individuals, government, non-government, private, and religious institutions with the best intentions sometimes travel to a society to help. Water break, 1 sec. It's people because they see them as uneducated, backward, or even inferior. Cultural imperialism is the deliberate imposition of one's own cultural values on another culture. Colonial expansion by Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, and England grew quickly in the 15th century, was accompanied by severe cultural imperialism. European colonizers often viewed the people in these new lands as uncultured savages who needed to adopt Catholic governance, Christianity, European dress, and other cultural practices. A modern example of cultural imperialism may include the work of international aid agencies who introduce agricultural methods and plant species from developed countries into regions that are better served by indigenous varieties and agricultural approaches to the particular region. Another example would be the deforestation of the Amazon basin, as indigenous cultures lose lands to timber corporations. When people find themselves in a new culture, they may experience disorientation and frustration. In sociology, we call this culture shock. In addition to the traveler's biological clock being off, a traveler from Chicago might find the nightly silence of rural Montana unsettling, not peaceful. Now imagine that the difference is cultural. An exchange student from China to the US might be annoyed by the constant interruptions in class or as other students ask questions, a practice that is considered rude in China. Perhaps the Chicago traveler was initially captivated with Montana's quiet beauty and the Chinese student was originally excited to see a US style classroom firsthand. But as they experience unanticipated differences from their own culture, they may experience ethnocentrism as their excitement gives way to discomfort and doubts about how to behave appropriately in the new situation. According to many authors, international students studying in the US report that there are personality traits and behaviors expected of them. Black African students report having to learn to be Black in the US, and Chinese students report that they are not naturally expected to be good at math, or they are naturally expected to be good at math. In African countries, people are identified by country or kin, not color. Eventually, as people learn more about a culture, they adapt to the new culture for a variety of reasons. Culture shock may appear because people aren't always expecting cultural differences. Anthropologist Ken Barger discovered this when he conducted a participatory observation in an Inuit community in the Canadian Arctic. Originally from Indiana, Barger hesitated when invited to join a local snowshoe race. He knew he would never hold his own against these experts. Sure enough, he finished last to his mortification. But the tribal members congratulated him, saying, "You really tried." In Barger's own culture, he had learned to value victory. To the Inuit people, winning was enjoyable, but their culture valued survival skills essential to their environment. How hard someone tried could mean the difference between life and death. Over the course of his stay, Barger participated in caribou hunts, learned how to take shelter in winter storms, and sometimes went days with little or no food to share among tribal members. Trying hard and working together, two non-material values, were indeed much more important than winning. During his time with the Inuit tribe, Barger learned to engage in cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the practice of assessing culture by its own standards rather than viewing it through the lens of one's own culture. Practicing cultural relativism requires an open mind and a willingness to consider and even adapt to new values, norms, and practices. However, indiscriminately embracing everything about a new culture is not always possible. Even the most culturally relativist people from egalitarian societies, ones in which women have political rights and control over their own bodies, question whether the widespread practice of female genital mutilation in countries such as Ethiopia and Sudan should be accepted as a part of cultural tradition. Sociologists attempting to engage in cultural relativism then struggle to reconcile aspects of their own culture with aspects of a culture that they are studying. Sociologists may take issue with the practices of female genital mutilation in many countries to ensure virginity at marriage, just as some male sociologists might take issue with scarring the flesh to show membership. Sociologists work diligently to keep personal biases out of research analysis. Sometimes, when people attempt to address feelings of ethnocentrism and develop cultural relativism, they swing too far to the other end of the spectrum. Xenocentrism is the opposite of ethnocentrism and refers to the belief that another culture is superior to one's own. The Greek root xeno, pronounced xeno, means stranger or foreign guest. An exchange student who goes home after a semester abroad or a sociologist who returns from the field may find it difficult to associate with the values of their own culture after having experienced what they deem a more upright or nobler way of living. An opposite reaction is xenophobia, an irrational fear or hatred of different cultures. Perhaps the greatest challenge for sociologists studying different cultures is the matter of keeping a perspective. It is impossible for anyone to overcome all cultural biases. The best we can do is strive to be aware of them. Pride in one's own culture doesn't have to lead to imposing its values or ideas on others, and an appreciation for another culture shouldn't preclude individuals from studying it with a critical eye. This practice is perhaps the most difficult for all the social scientists. Sociology in the real world. Overcoming culture shock. During her summer vacation, Caitlin flew from Chicago, Illinois, to Madrid, Spain, to visit Maria, the exchange student she had befriended the previous semester. In the airport, she heard rapid musical Spanish being spoken all around her. Exciting as it was, she felt isolated and disconnected. Maria's mother kissed Caitlin on both cheeks when she greeted her. Her imposing father kept his distance. Caitlin was half asleep by the time supper was served. At 10 p.m., Maria's family sat at the table for hours, speaking loudly, gesturing, and arguing about politics, a taboo dinner subject in Caitlin's house. They served wine and toasted their honored guest. Caitlin had trouble interpreting her host's facial expressions and did not realize she could make the next toast. That night, Caitlin crawled into a strange bed, wishing she had not come. She missed her home and felt overwhelmed by the new customs, language, and surroundings. She studied Spanish in school for years. Why hadn't it prepared her for this? What Caitlin did not realize was that people depend not only on spoken words, but also on body language, like gestures and facial expressions to communicate. Cultural norms and practices accompany even the smallest nonverbal signals. They help people know when to shake hands, where to sit, how to converse, and even when to laugh. We relate to others through a shared set of cultural norms, and ordinarily, we take them for granted. For this reason, culture shock is often associated with traveling abroad, although it can happen in one's own country, state, or even hometown. Anthropologist Kalervo Oberg is credited with first coining the term culture shock. In his studies, Oberg found that most people are excited at first to encounter a new culture, but bit by bit, they become stressed by interacting with people from different culture who speak another language and use different regional experiences. There is new food to digest, new daily schedules to follow, and new rules of etiquette to learn. Living with this constant stress can make people feel incompetent and insecure. People react to frustration in a new culture. Oberg found by initially rejecting it and glorifying one's own culture. An American visiting Italy might long for a real pizza or complain about the unsafe driving habits of Italians. It helps to remember that culture is learned. Everyone is ethnocentric to an extent, and identifying everyone believes their own way of doing things is correct, not necessarily someone else's way. And identifying with one's own country is natural. Caitlin's shock was minor compared to that of her friends, Dayak and Malika, a Turkish couple living in married student housing on campus. And it was nothing like that of her classmate Sanai. Sanai had been forced to flee war-torn Bosnia with her family when she was 15. After 2 weeks in Spain, Caitlin had developed more compassion and understanding for what those people had gone through. She understood that adjusting to a new culture takes time. Hold on one sec. It can take weeks or months to recover from culture shock and can take years to fully adjust to living in a new culture. Did its thing. Hold on. By the end of Caitlin's trip, how far is Battleground? Oh no, I don't have to go to Battleground. I can do here. Maybe. Ah, dang it. Stop. Oh, come on. Ow. That's. I don't want to do that. It's too far. All right, we'll take a break from that. By the end of Caitlin's trip, she had made new lifelong friends. Caitlin stepped out of her comfort zone. She had learned a lot about Spain, but discovered a lot about herself and her own culture. All right, I'm going to take a short recess. And I still got freaking stomach grumblies. I think I'm going to have to eat that whole package of freaking. They did half a package, a little less than half a package of that chicken and noodles. But I might have to eat the whole thing. Oh, hold on. Another order, potentially. Yep, I'm doing that one. All right, I'm going to pause. I'll be back. All right, I'm back. Just did an Instacart real quick. $15 one. I just wanted to do that real quick while to see how long the pause, if it like automatically stopped or not. So that was nice. All right, let's go ahead and work on the next chapter or section, 3.2, Elements of Culture. By the end of this section, you should be able to differentiate values, beliefs, and norms, explain the significance of symbols and language to a culture, explain the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, discuss the role of social control within culture. Values and beliefs. The first and perhaps most crucial elements of culture we will discuss are values and beliefs. Value does not mean monetary worth in sociology, but rather ideals or principles and standards members of a culture hold in high regard. Most cultures in any society hold knowledge, education in high regard. Values are deeply embedded and are critical for learning a culture's beliefs, which are the tenets or convictions that people hold to be true. Individual cultures in a society have personal beliefs, but they also shared collective values. To illustrate the difference, U.S. citizens may believe in the American dream, that anyone who works hard enough will be successful and wealthy. Underlying this belief is the American value that wealth is important. In other cultures, success may be tied less to wealth and more to having many healthy children. Values shape a society by suggesting what is good and what is bad, beautiful and ugly, sought or avoided. Consider the value that U.S. places on youth. Children represent innocence and purity, while a youthful adult appearance signifies sexuality. Shaped by this value, individuals spend millions of dollars each year on cosmetic products and surgeries to look young and beautiful. The U.S. also has individualistic culture, meaning people place a high value on individuality and independence. In contrast, many other cultures are collectivist, meaning the welfare of the group takes priority over that of the individual. Fulfilling a society's values can be difficult. Marital monogamy is valued, but many spouses engage in infidelity. Cultural diversity and equal opportunities for all people are valued in the U.S., yet the country's highest political offices have been dominated by white men. Who cares? Values often suggest how people should behave, but they don't actually reflect how people do behave. Values portray an ideal culture, the standard society would like to embrace and live up to, but ideal culture differs from real culture. In an ideal culture, there would be no traffic accidents, murders, poverty, or racial tension. See, that makes no sense. You can't say culture's not an accident, so you can't have a traffic accident because of, I guess you could say it's culturally caused, but it's really just negligence. People choose to be negligent, which can be a culture, but whatever. Okay. But in real culture, police officers, lawmakers, educators, and social workers constantly strive to prevent or address these issues. American teenagers are encouraged to value celibacy. However, the number of unplanned pregnancies among teens reveals that the ideal alone is not enough to spare teenagers the potential consequences of having sex. Yeah, it's called choice. One of the ways societies strive to maintain its values is through rewards and punishments. When people observe the norms of society and uphold its values, they are often rewarded. A boy who helps an elderly woman board a bus may receive a smile and a thank you. A business manager who raises profit margins may receive a quarterly bonus. People sanction unwanted or inappropriate behaviors by withholding support, approval, or permission, or by implementing sanctions. We may think of sanction as a negative term, but sanctions are forms of social control, ways to encourage conformity to social norms or rules. Sometimes people conform to norms in anticipation or expectation of positive sanctions. Receiving good grades, for instance, may mean praise from parents and teachers. Sanctions can also be negative. A boy who shoves an elderly woman aside to board the bus first may receive frowns or even a scolding from other passengers. A business manager who drives away customers will likely be fired. Breaking norms and rejecting values can lead to cultural sanctions, such as earning a negative label like lazy, or to legal sanctions, such as traffic tickets, fines, or imprisonment. Utilizing social control encourages most people to conform regardless of whether authority figures such as law enforcement are present. Values are not static. They change across time and between groups as people evaluate, debate, and change collective social beliefs. Values also vary from culture to culture. For example, cultures differ in their values about what kind of physical closeness are appropriate in public. It's rare to see two male friends or coworkers holding hands in the US, where that behavior often symbolizes romantic feelings. But in many nations, masculine physical intimacy is considered natural in public. This difference in cultural values comes to light when people reacted to photos of former President George W. Bush holding hands with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in 2005. Simple gestures such as hand holding carry great symbolic differences across culture. Norms. So far, many of the examples of this chapter have described how people are expected to behave in certain situations. For example, buying food or boarding a bus. These examples describe the visible and invisible rules of conduct through which societies are structured, or what sociologists call norms. Norms are behaviors that reflect compliance with what cultures and societies have defined as good, right, and important. Most members adhere to them. Formal norms are established, written rules existing in all societies. They support many social institutions such as the military, criminal justice, and healthcare systems, and public schools. Functionalists may question what purpose these norms serve. Conflict theorists might be interested in who creates, benefits, and suffers under these formal norms. And symbolic interactionists wonder about how a group that benefits interacts. Laws are formal norms, but so are employee manuals, college entrance exam requirements, and no running signs at swimming pools. Formal norms are the most specific and clearly stated of the various types of norms, and they are the most strictly enforced. But they are enforced to varying degrees. For example, private property is highly valued in the US. Thieves can be fined, imprisoned, or both. People safeguard valuable possessions by locking their doors, buying a safe, and installing alarm systems on homes and cars. A less strictly enforced social norm is driving while intoxicated. While it's against the law to drive drunk, drinking is, for the most part, an acceptable social behavior. And though there are laws to punish drunk driving, there are few systems in place to prevent the crime. There are plenty of formal norms, but the list of informal norms, causal behaviors that are generally and widely conformed to, is longer. People learn informal norms by observation, imitation, and general socialization. Some informal norms are taught directly, kiss your Aunt Edna, or use your napkin, while others are learned by observation, including understanding consequences when someone else violates a norm. Informal norms dictate appropriate behaviors without the need of written rules, and so may be difficult to learn when you are new or not familiar with the culture. Although formal norms define personal interactions, they extend into other systems as well. In the US, there are informal norms regarding behavior at fast food restaurants. Customers line up to order their food and leave when they are done. They don't sit down at a table with strangers, sing loudly as they prepare their condiments, or nap in a booth. Most people don't commit even harmless breaches of informal norms. Okay, I'm not going to do the research stuff. I'm just going to do just the main readings. Norms may be further classified as either mores or folkways. Mores are norms that embody the moral views and principles of a group. They often have a religious foundation. Violating them can have serious consequences. The strongest mores are protected with laws and other formal sanctions. In most societies, for instance, homicide is considered immoral, and it's punishable by law, a formal norm. But more often, mores are judged and guarded by public sentiment, an informal norm. People who violate mores are seen as shameful. They can even be shunned or banned from some groups. The mores of the US school system require that a student's writing be in the student's own words or use special forms such as quotation marks and a whole system of citation for crediting other writers. Submitting or publishing another person's words as if they are one's own has a name, plagiarism. The consequences for violating this norm are often severe and can result in expulsion from school or termination from employment. Unlike mores, folkways are norms without any moral underpinnings. Rather, folkways direct appropriate behavior in the day-to-day practices and expression of a culture. We can think of them as traditions, things we do because we have always have. They indicate whether to shake hands or kiss on the cheek when greeting another person. They specify whether to wear a tie and a blazer or a t-shirt and sandals to an event. In Canada, women can smile and say hello to men on the street. In Egypt, that's not acceptable. In regions in the southwest US or southern US, bumping into an acquaintance means stopping to chat. It's considered rude not to, no matter how busy one is. All right, I'm going to pause for a sec. I think someone just showed up. All right, well, either my hearing is really sensitive or that guy's car is just the way it's not loud, but it vibrates really hard. And I can hear it when he parks and when he does his thing. So, jeez. It's considered rude not to, no matter how busy one is. In other regions, people guard their privacy and value time efficiency. A simple nod of the head is enough. Other accepted folkways in the U.S. may include holding the door open for a stranger or giving someone a gift on their birthday. The rules regarding these folkways may change from culture to culture. A folkway in one culture could be extremely rude in another. Folkways are actions that people everywhere take for granted. People need to act without thinking in order to get seamlessly through daily routines. They can't stop and analyze every action. Folkways might be small actions, learned by observations and imitated, but they are by no means trivial. An important folkway in many cultures is kissing grandmother on the cheek. Fail to do so and you will likely be scolded. Symbols and culture. Humans consciously and subconsciously are always striving to make sense of their surrounding world. Symbols such as gestures, signs, objects, signals, and words help people understand that world. They provide communication methods to understanding experiences by conveying recognizable meanings that are shared by societies. The world is filled with symbols. Sports uniforms, company logos, and traffic signs are symbols. In some cultures, a gold ring is a symbol of marriage. Some symbols are highly functional. Stop signs, for instance, provide useful information. As physical objects, they belong to material culture, but because they function as symbols, they also convey non-material cultural meanings. Some symbols are valuable only in what they represent. Trophies, blue ribbons, or gold medals, for example, represent accomplishments, but many objects have both material and non-material symbolic value. Symbols often get noticed. Symbols often get noticed when they are out of context. Used unconventionally, they convey strong messages. A stop sign placed on the door of a college building makes a political statement, as does a camouflage military jacket worn in an anti-war protest. Together, the semaphore signals for N and D represent nuclear disarmament and form the well-known peace sign. Some college students wear pajamas and bedroom slippers to class. Clothing that was formerly associated only with privacy and bedtime. By wearing the outfit, students are defying traditional cultural norms. Some symbols represent only one side of the story and elicit strong emotions, which can lead to social unrest. Their presence is a reminder of a nation's worst times and not something to celebrate. Many of these symbols are targets of vandalism, as the destruction of these representations is symbolic. Effigies representing public figures are burned to demonstrate anger at certain leaders. In 1989, crowds tore down the Berlin Wall, a decades-old symbol of the division between East and West Germany, communism, and capitalism. In the U.S., beginning in 2019, statues associated with slavery and the Civil War were removed from the state capitals, college campuses, and public parks. In Germany, any display of Hitler or Nazi memorabilia or to deny the Holocaust is illegal. While different cultures have varying systems of symbols, one system is common to all: language. Whatever its form, people learn social and cultural norms through it. Language and symbols. Language is a system that uses symbols with which people communicate and through which culture is transmitted. Letters, which make up words, pictographs, and hand gestures are all symbols that create a language used for communication. Sign language, for example, requires an intimate knowledge not only of alphabet, but also of signs that represent entire words and the meaning indicated by certain facial expressions or postures. Its grammar differs from the spoken language, as spoken language is different across regions, nations, and cultures, and can even differ by the age of the person. So too does sign language. All language systems contain the basic elements that are effective in communicating ideas: object, subject, action. A written language system consists of symbols that refer to spoken sound. Taken together, these symbols convey specific meanings. The English language uses a combination of 26 letters to create words. These 26 letters make up over 600,000 recognized words. We can compare the reliance on tone and inflection to Mandarin Chinese. It contains over 8,000 characters, but the same character may symbolize different concepts depending on the tone used. English today contains an English and French version for the same concept. For example, in the English version, one eats, but in the French version, one dines. In the English version, we meet someone. In the French version, we encounter someone. Readers of American English may be surprised by the inclusion of a U in some spellings of words like behavior or flavor. Americans have dropped that U, and that writers of British English include. Billions of people speak English, and there are almost as many pronunciations of it. Rules for speaking and writing vary even within cultures, most notably by region. Do you eat a grinder, a sub, or a hero euro? Do you refer to a can of carbonated liquid as soda or pop? Is a household entertainment room a family room, rec room, or den? When leaving a restaurant, do you ask your server for a check, the ticket, or your bill? Language is constantly evolving and adding new words as societies create new ideas. In this age of technology, many cultures have adapted almost instantly to new nouns such as email and internet, and verbs such as downloading, texting, and blogging. These would have considered nonsense words such as the world 25 years ago. Just the word. What? These would have considered nonsense words just the world 25 years ago. That makes absolutely no sense. Yeah, I don't know what that means. Language and culture. Even while it constantly evolves, language shapes our perception of reality and our behavior. In the 1920s, linguists Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf advanced this idea, which became known as Sapir-Whorf hypothesis or linguistic relativity. It is based on the idea that people experience their world through their language, and therefore understand their world through the cultural meanings embedded in their language. The hypothesis suggests that language shapes thought and thus behavior. For example, words have attached meanings beyond their definition that can influence thought and behavior. In the US, where the number 13 is associated with bad luck, many high rise buildings do not have a 13th floor. In Japan, however, the number 4 is considered unlucky, since it is pronounced similarly to the Japanese word for death. Many sociologists believe that languages have a broad and lasting impact on perception. In 2002, Lara Boroditsky and her colleagues conducted experiments on native German and Spanish speakers in English. Hold on one sec. Too far. Okay, sorry. German speakers describe keys as hard, heavy, jagged, metal, serrated, and useful, while Spanish speakers use the adjectives golden, intricate, little, lovely, shiny, and tiny. The team concluded that gender perceptions acquired in a person's native language carry forward to how they see the world when they switch to a language without grammatical genders. Some sociologists also believe the structure of language can have consequences on individual and group behavior. For example, a series of studies have found that Finland has a significantly higher rate of workplace accidents than Sweden, despite the fact that the languages have similar workplace regulations. John A. Lucy explained this discrepancy through differences in the structure of these languages. Swedish places a greater emphasis on the timing of movements in three-dimensional space. Consequently, Lucy argued the Swedish factories are physically arranged in a manner that supports the smooth running of the product process. Finish factors experience frequent disruptions so that workers must rush and have more accidents. Okay, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has been interpreted to suggest that if a word does not exist in a language, then users of that language cannot have the experience. Studies have shown, for instance, that unless people have access to the word ambivalent, they don't recognize having conflicting positive and negative feelings about an issue as ambivalence. However, the hypothesis should not suggest that people do not have conflicting feelings, but rather that they interpret the feelings differently. In addition to using spoken language, people communicate without words. Nonverbal communication is symbolic, and in the case of language, is learned through one's culture. Some gestures are nearly universal, some are not. Smiles often indicate positive reinforcement. Smiles often indicate positive reinforcement in the US, whereas in some cultures it is rude, as you do not know the person. A thumbs up in Russia and Australia is an offensive curse. Other gestures may vary in meaning depending on the situation and the person. A wave of the hands can mean many things, depending on how it's done and for whom. It may mean hello, goodbye, no thank you, or I'm royalty. Wings convey a variety of messages, including we have a secret, I'm only kidding, or I'm attracted to you. From a distance, a person may read the emotional situation of people just by watching their body language and facial expressions. However, many cultures communicate with lots of physicality, which people outside that culture may interpret as an argument. So, for example, you might believe two people are arguing when in fact they are simply having a regular conversation. Okay, I'm going to pause it. Okay. 3.3 High, low, pop, sub, counterculture, and cultural change. By the end of the section, you should be able to discuss the roles of both high culture and pop culture within society, differentiate between subculture and counterculture, explain the role of innovation, invention, and discovery in culture, describe the role of cultural lag and globalization in cultural change. It may seem obvious that there are a multitude of cultural differences between societies in the world. After all, we can easily see that people vary from one society to the next. It's natural to think that a young woman from a village in rural Kenya in Eastern Africa would have a different view of the world from a young woman from the urban Mumbai, India, one of the most populated cities in the world. Additionally, each culture has its own internal variations. Sometimes the differences between cultures are not as large as the differences within cultures. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu wrote about cultural capital, which consists of material goods, non-material attitudes, and knowledge that are specific to a certain economic class. Bourdieu grouped cultural capital into three categories: embodied, a regional dialect; objectified, possessions; and institutionalized, academic credentials. In the U.S., some group culture into three categories as well: high, low, and pop, for popular. High, low, and popular culture. Can you identify the chief financial officer of three major corporations? How about the name of the server at three local hangouts? How many books do you own? How many social media sites do you visit? Is your family listed on the social register? Have you ever heard of the social register? Each pair, one type of knowledge is considered high culture and the other low culture. This could be considered stereotyping by economic class rather than by race or gender, but sociologists use the term high culture to describe the pattern of cultural experiences and attitudes that exist in the highest or elite class of segments of society. People often associate high culture with intellectualism, political power, and prestige. In America, high culture also tends to be associated with wealth. Events considered high culture can be expensive, formal, and exclusive. Attending a ballet, seeing a play, listening to a live symphony performance, or attending a prestigious university. Similarly, low culture is associated with the pattern of cultural experiences and attitudes that exist in the lowest classes, segments of society. The term popular culture refers to the pattern of cultural experiences and attitudes that exist in mainstream society. Popular culture events might include a parade, a baseball game, or the season finale of a television show. Music, anime, and cosplay are pieces of popular culture. Popular culture is accessible by most and is expressed and spread via commercial and social media outlets, such as radio, television, movies, the music industry, publishers, and corporate-run websites. You can share a discussion of favorite football teams with a new coworker, or comment on a reality show when making small talk in a line at the grocery store. But if you try to launch it into a deep discussion on the classical Greek play Antigone, few members of the U.S. society today would be familiar with it. Though high culture may be considered by some as superior to popular culture, the lines between high culture and popular culture vary over time and place. Shakespearean plays, considered to be popular culture when they were written, are now part of our society's high culture. Sorry. Although high culture may be considered by some to 500 years from now, will our descendants consider Dancing with the Stars as fine performance art? Subculture and counterculture. A subculture is just what it sounds like, a smaller cultural group within a larger culture. People of a subculture are part of a larger culture, but also share a specific identity within a smaller group. Thousands of subcultures exist within the U.S. Ethnic and racial groups share the language, food, and customs of their heritage. Other subcultures are formed through shared experiences. Biker culture revolves around an interest in motorcycles. Some subcultures are formed by people who possess traits or preferences that differ from the majority of a society's population. The body modification community embraces aesthetic additions to the human body, such as tattoos, piercings, and certain forms of plastic surgery. But even as members of a subculture band together, they still identify with and participate in the larger society. Sociologists distinguish subcultures from countercultures, which reject some of the larger culture's norms and values, in contrast to subcultures, which operate relatively smooth within the larger society. Countercultures might actively defy larger society by developing their own set of rules and norms to live by, sometimes even creating communities that operate outside of greater society. Counterculture members are against the dominant ruling culture and want to install their own values. Subculture members may want to change some things, but established procedures are followed. Okay. Cults, a word derived from culture, are also considered counterculture groups. The group Yearning for Zion in El Dorado, Texas, existed outside the mainstream and the limelight until its leader was accused of statutory rape and underage marriage. The sect's formal norms clashed too severely to be tolerated by U.S. law, and in 2008, authorities raided the compound and removed more than 200 women and children from the property. Many cults claim to be spiritual, often establishing themselves as a religion. When each of the three Abrahamic religions in the world began, they were treated as cults and suffered much oppression because of it. Cultural change. Cultures continually change because new items are added to material culture every day, and in turn, meanings are assigned to them, which affects other cultural components. For example, a new technology such as railroads or smartphones might introduce new ways of traveling or communicating. New ideas such as flash mobs or crowdfunding enter a culture. Sociologists identify two broad categories of change as innovation and diffusion. Material cultural change happens when new items are discovered or invented and enter a culture as a result of globalization. Innovation, discovery, and invention. An innovation refers to an object or concept's initial appearance in society. It is innovative because it is new. Innovations are discovered or invented. Discoveries make known previously unknown but existing aspects of reality. In 1610, when Galileo looked through his telescope and discovered Saturn, the planet was already there, but until then, no one had known about it. When Christopher Columbus encountered Hispaniola, the island was, of course, already well known to its inhabitants. However, his discovery was new knowledge for Europeans, and it opened the way to changes in European culture, as well as to the cultures of the discovered lands. For example, new foods such as potatoes and tomatoes transformed the European diet, and horses brought from Europe changed hunting practices of Great Plains Native Americans. Inventions result when something new is formed from existing objects or concepts, when things are put together in an entirely new manner. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, electric appliances were invented at an astonishing pace. Cars, airplanes, vacuum cleaners, lamps, radios, telephones, and televisions were all new inventions. Inventions may shape a culture by replacing older ways of carrying out tasks, being integrated into current practices, or creating new activities. Their adoption reflects and may shape cultural values, and their use may introduce new norms and practices. Consider the rise of mobile phones. As more and more people began carrying these devices, phone conversations no longer restricted to homes, offices, and phone booths. People on trains, in restaurants, and in other public places became annoyed by listening to one-sided conversations. New norms and behaviors were needed for cell phone use. Some people pushed for the idea that those who are out in the world should pay attention to their companions and surroundings. Fortunately, technology found a workaround, texting, which enables quiet communications or past phone conversations as the primary way to communicate anywhere, everywhere. When the pace of innovation increases, it can lead to generation gaps. Technological gadgets that catch on quickly with one generation are sometimes dismissed by an older generation that is skeptical or struggles to adopt them. The older generation might tune in to a musician performing on public television, while the younger generation prefers a live stream. A culture's objects and ideas can cause not just generational, but cultural gaps. Material culture tends to diffuse more quickly than non-material culture. Technology can spread through society in a matter of months, but it can take generations for the ideas and beliefs of society to change, including methods for researching or learning information, e.g., library versus internet search. Coined by sociologist William F. Ogburn, the term culture lag refers to the time that passes between the introduction of a new item of material culture and its social acceptance. Culture lag can also cause tangible problems. The infrastructure of the U.S., built 100 years ago or more, is having trouble supporting today's more heavily populated and fast-paced life. Yet there is a lag in conceptualizing solutions to infrastructure problems. Municipalities struggle with traffic control, increased air pollution, and limited parking, which are all symptoms of culture lag. Although people are becoming aware of the consequences, overuse or lack of resources addressing these needs takes time. Diffusion and globalization. And I'm going to pause for a minute, so I need to go check on the food. All right, stirring is done. Diffusion and globalization. Another way material and non-material culture crosses borders is through diffusion. Like a gas in a laboratory experiment, the item or idea spreads throughout. Diffusion relates to the process of the integration of cultures into the mainstream, while globalization refers to the promotion and increase of interactions between different regions and populations around the globe, resulting in the integration of markets and interdependence of nations fostered through trade. Ideas, concepts, or artifacts are often diffused or spread to individuals and groups, resulting in new social practices. People might develop a new appreciation of Thai noodles or Italian gelato, which is ice cream. Access to television and the internet has brought the lifestyles and values portrayed in U.S. sitcoms into homes around the globe and vice versa. Twitter feeds from public demonstrations in one nation have encouraged political protesters in other countries. When this kind of diffusion occurs, ideas from one culture are introduced into another, often before the associated material objects. The graphs above displays when diffusion typically occurs, essentially driving an innovation to spread beyond its earliest adopters to the wider majority of people. 3.4 Theoretical Perspectives on Culture. By the end of this section, you should be able to discuss the major theoretical approaches to cultural interpretation. Music, fashion, technology, and values are all products of culture. But what do they mean? How do sociologists perceive and interpret culture based on these material and non material items? Let's finish our analysis of culture by reviewing them in the context of three historical theoretical perspectives: functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Functionalists view society as a system in which all parts work or function together to create society as a whole. They often use the human body as an analogy. Looking at life in this way, societies need culture to exist. Cultural norms function to support the fluid operation of society, and cultural values guide people in making choices. Such as members of society work together to fulfill society's needs, culture exists to meet its members' social and personal needs. Functionalists also study culture in terms of values. For example, education is highly valued in the US. The culture of education, including material culture such as classrooms, textbooks, libraries, educational technology, dormitories, and non-material culture such as specific teaching approaches, demonstrates how much emphasis is placed on the value of educating a society's members. In contrast, if education consisted of only proving guidelines and some study material without the other elements, that would demonstrate that the culture places a lower value on education. Functionalists view the different categories of culture as serving many functions. Having membership in a culture, a subculture, or a counterculture brings camaraderie and social cohesion and benefits the larger society by providing places for people who share similar ideas. Conflict theorists, however, view social structure as inherently unequal, based on power differentials related to issues like class, gender, race, and age. For a conflict theorist, established educational methods are seen as reinforcing the dominant societal culture and issues of privilege. This historical experiences. Oh shit! Dang it! Oh shoot! Come on! Shoot! Come on! Shoot! I got a good order, maybe, possibly. Please, 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 please. Oh, dang it! I got excited and I kept messing up. I ended up missing the order. That was the $58 one. There was a $47 one that was good, but it's 36 miles of total driving, and I really just don't feel like doing it. And I'm cooking right now, so might as well wait. Okay. Conflict theorists, however, view social structure as inherently unequal based on power differentials related to issues like class, gender, race, and age. For a conflict theorist, established educational methods are seen as reinforcing the dominant societal culture and issues of privilege. The historical experiences of certain groups, those based upon race, sex, or class, for instance, or those that portray a negative narrative about the dominant culture, are excluded from history books. For a long time, U.S. history education omitted the assaults on Native American people in society that were part of the colonization of the land that became the United States. A more recent example is the recognition of historical events like race riots and racially based massacres like the Tulsa Massacre, which was widely reported when it occurred in 1921, but was omitted from any national historical accounts of that period of time. When an episode of HBO's Watchmen showcased the event in stunning and horrific detail, many people expressed surprise that it had occurred and it hadn't been taught or discussed. Historical omission is not restricted to the US. North Korean students learn of their benevolent leader without information from about his mistreatment of large portions of the population. According to defectors and North Korea experts, while famines and dire economic conditions are obvious, state media and educational agencies work to ensure that North Koreans do not understand how different their country is from others. Inequities exist within a culture's value system and become embedded in laws, policies, and procedures. This inclusion leads to the oppression of the powerless by the powerful. A society's cultural norms benefit some people but hurt others. Women were not allowed to vote in the US until 1920, making it hard for them to get laws passed that protected their rights in the home and in the workplace. Same-sex couples were denied the right to marry in the US until 2015. Elsewhere around the world, same-sex marriage is only legal in 31 of the planet's 195 countries. At the core of the conflict theory is the effect of economic production and materialism, dependence on technology in rich nations versus a lack of technology and education in poor nations. Conflict theorists believe that a society system of material production has an effect on the rest of culture. People who have less power have fewer opportunities to adapt to cultural change. This view contrasts with the perspective of functionalism, where functionalists would see the purpose of culture, traditions, folkways, values as helping individuals navigate through life and societies run smoothly. Conflict theorists examine how sociocultural struggles, including the power and privilege created by, for some by using and reinforcing a dominating culture that sustains their position in society. Symbolic interactionism is a sociological perspective that is most concerned with the face-to-face interactions and cultural meanings between members of society. It is considered a micro-level analysis. Instead of looking how access is different between the rich and poor, interactionists see culture as being created and maintained by the way people interact and in how individuals interpret each other's actions. In this perspective, people perpetuate cultural ways. Proponents of this theory conceptualize human interaction as a continuous process of deriving meaning from both objects in the environment and the actions of others. Every object and action has a symbolic meaning, and language serves as a means for people to represent and communicate interpretations of these meanings to others. Symbolic interactionists perceive culture as highly dynamic and fluid, as it is dependent on how meaning is interpreted and how individuals interact when conveying these meanings. Interactionists research changes in language. They study additions and deletions of words, the changing meaning of words, and the transmission of words in an original language into different ones. We begin this chapter by asking, what is culture? Culture is comprised of values, beliefs, norms, language, practices, and artifacts of a society. Because culture is learned, it includes how people think and express themselves. While we may like to consider ourselves individuals, we must acknowledge the impact of culture on us and our way of life. We inherit language that shapes our perceptions and pattern behavior, including those of family, friends, faith, and politics. To an extent, culture is a social comfort. After all, sharing a similar culture with others is precisely what defines societies. Nations would not exist if people did not coexist culturally. There could be no societies if people did not share heritage and language, and civilization would cease to function if people did not agree on similar values and systems of social control. Culture is preserved through transmission from one generation to the next, but it also evolves through processes of innovation, discovery, and cultural diffusion. As such, cultures are social constructions. The society approves or disapproves of items or ideas, which are therefore included or not in the culture. We may be restricted by the confines of our own culture, but as humans, we have the ability to question values and make conscious decisions. No better evidence of this freedom exists than the amount of cultural diversity around the world. The more we study another culture, the better we become at understanding our own. Okay, and that is it for Sociology Chapter 3.